Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this special Wellness Masterclass with Amrita Banta. The topic is the new normal, global affluent consumers mindset post-COVID-19. I think, as Nancy said, the fact that we have so many people signed up for this call from so many countries says quite a bit. And I'm really glad that we are going to be speaking about the affluent consumer. That isn't something we've talked about for a while, and yet it is something that we're all very interested in. Amrita, I know you from Singapore when we first met, when you spoke there, and you were a very popular speaker, and one of those speakers where I wish she didn't stop. I wish she kept going and sharing more information. So we are really glad. Thank you for being here today and sharing some very up-to-date information. Before I turn it over to Nancy, who will give a more formal introduction and get things going, Nancy is going to be moderating today. I just wanted to mention that I've had a background with affluent consumers in that I worked for many years with the Golden Door in Southern California. And the Golden Door, some of you may know it, was started by Deborah Zakay. We had 39 guests every week. It was the most expensive spa in the US and still is, I believe. And so I got used to seeing this affluent clientele because they were really all affluent, come for a week and stay and change their lives. So one thing I learned, I just wanted to share, is that when you influence an affluent person, oftentimes you're influencing many more because they often run companies, and then what they learn trickles down. They employ a lot of people. The celebrities that were there, they affect a lot of people. So I think that it is important to pay attention to the affluent clientele. And today that we're going to find out a little bit about what has changed post COVID or within COVID, I cannot think of a more interesting and important discussion. So thank you, Amrita, for being here. And Nancy Davis, over to you.
Thank you so much, Susie. That was a great introduction, and I think very important to remember. The trickle-down effect of the people who Amrita deals with all the time is very powerful and very important. So before I introduce Amrita, I just want to give you my usual Zoom instructions. Beatrice has muted everyone and will keep everybody muted. This is going to be a very large group, and we want to be able to hear Amrita and keep the background noise limited. If you have two different ways to view the Zoom call, the top right of your Zoom window, you can choose gallery view and see a kind of mosaic of faces from all over the world. Or in this case, I would say choose speaker view, because Amrita is going to do quite an in-depth and interesting presentation, and you'll want that to be prominent on your screen. If you want to see all your friends who are on this call, center right of the Zoom window, there's a blue arrow, and you can click that and scroll through the many pages of faces. The chat button, which is already alive and well, is bottom center of your Zoom window. There's a little icon, and that'll open a window to your right. Please use that to say hello, let us know where you're from, and very importantly, put a question for Amrita there. I'll be looking at those, Susie will be looking at those as the call goes on, and we will try to get to your questions at the end of the presentation. So that's the place to leave your questions. I will also say that Zoom unfortunately put the share screen button right next to the chat, so be careful not to hit the bright green button and accidentally share your screen. Anyway, Amrita will be sharing, so hopefully that will eliminate that issue. And many of you ask during the call, this call is being recorded, and it is going to be shared on our Global Wellness Summit website under the Masterclass tab. And lots of people go there after to look at it, and I urge you to send that link to your friends who were not able to join this call. As Managing Director of Agility Research and Strategy, Amrita Banta has worked with global brands to understand and win over affluent consumers. Today, she'll share insights gathered through thousands of interviews with affluent consumers across Asia and the United States, interestingly enough, conducted in June and July during this COVID crisis. This is particularly interesting because of the timing. I think it's some of the first research any of us will hear that has taken place during this time. Amrita will discuss how the crisis has changed affluent individuals' travel, consumption, and lifestyle habits in unexpected ways, and the differences and similarities between Asian and American affluent consumers. The insights shared here will prove invaluable for brands eager to navigate this particular landscape. Amrita, just so you know, is a frequent speaker on everything premium and luxury on the BBC, CNBC, Bloomberg, other international media, travel, luxury conferences the world over, including the New York Times luxury conferences, international luxury travel, Financial Times, and most importantly, the Global Wellness Summit. She's been invited to the breakers as well to hopefully expand on this kind of research and tell us more about the luxury consumer in Palm Beach this year. Amrita spoke last year, as Susie mentioned, in Singapore. She was a big hit, and so we are thrilled she's here for the masterclass today. She's going to share her knowledge, her insights, her warm and wonderful personality. She's coming to us from Singapore. She's had a cup of coffee. It's 9:30 at night. And I understand that it's possible her mother is on this call, so everybody be on their best behavior. Amrita, welcome. You have to unmute, bottom left.
I didn't realize that. Thanks so much, Susie and Nancy, for hosting me again. I had the most wonderful conference in October. It was my first of your conferences, and I have to say it was such a beautiful experience. And I'm so happy to be back here and able to share some of my insights with this lovely group that is joining us today from all over the world. So with that, I'd like to just share the screen and talk to you a little bit about what I thought was a very interesting topic today. And it's really about this crisis and how has it changed lifestyle, consumption, of affluent consumers. A little bit of a background about, the work and the context that we're going to be speaking in today. So for people who don't know us, we're a data research and strategy company, very focused on premium brands around the world. So anybody who's looking at the emerging affluent or the affluent or high net worth is really part of our, the brands that we work with. And it's across travel, hospitality, private banking, auto. So quite relevant in the sense of gathering data from a lot of different brands and categories. And I'm going to present some of that today. So this is really part of a sharing. Nancy already mentioned this, but we do like to share our insights. We're proud of our data, and it makes us, meet beautiful people all around the world. And this is really part of that sharing exercise. I think the important thing is, where does this data really come from? Because, affluent and luxury consumers are not so easy to reach out to. A lot of brands have their own data, whether it's banks or whether it's luxury companies or a hotel. But to really reach out to affluent consumers who are unbiased, who are not your clients, is really where we come in. So this is a global community of affluent and high net worth consumers that we have invited in to an insight sharing community. And 3 to 4 times a year, they're part of very interesting researches that we do, qualitative, quantitative, sharing their data, coming on interviews. And of course, we incentivize them with donations to their charities, with invites to events. But it's definitely a very powerful community where we can get reliable data. And I think that's really important for the business and about the research that we're going to talk about today. So let's look at the presentation and a little bit of an overview of what this presentation is about. So we do a trend lens every year where we look at all the trends that are emerging around the world. 3 to 4 times a year, a lot of our clients actually subscribe to this data. Today, I'm just going to give you an overview of this data, and it's one of the first sessions we're doing with the post-COVID data. And so we've done these interviews across China, India, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, the US, and we're now going to be getting on to Europe and the other countries that are part of this program. Today, what I'm going to be presenting is more about China and the US being two of the biggest economies in the world. But if you look at the sample just across countries, so you understand, in each one, we have a representative sample. So in China, we've spoken to 1,040 affluent consumers, over 300 millionaires out of tier 1, 2, and 3 cities. So quite a high net worth audience. Even in the USA, the 537 sample that we just spoke to, and I mean, the data is literally being crunched as we speak. So it's very fresh data that Luca and the team have really churned and brought together for this session. We do have over 300 millionaires in this sample as well. So it's affluent, which means household income of 150,000 US dollars and above. But a lot of the people that we've spoken to are really up to $1 million, $3 million assets under management. So quite an interesting group. And as it happens in China, we have many more millennials that come in. So if you look at the sample, 53% of our sample in China is actually quite young, and they are affluent, they have the money. And then you have the US, where the average age is about 50. And a lot of our sample came in at 45 plus, for affluent and high net worth. So that's kind of a background of the people we're speaking to. It is a pulse study. And then, of course, we add a lot of more data throughout the year as we go along. So we keep increasing the information that we collect, and we do comparisons. So we spoke to a lot of this audience in January, and then we went back to them in June and July. And that's really a very interesting part of the study. So let's move on. And I just have one slide to give you a snapshot on what's going on across the Asia Pacific and the US in terms of how are they feeling about their economic well-being. Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Now, just to explain to you, we have China, which is quite optimistic on one hand. 55% of our sample feel that the economic well-being is actually going to increase over the next year. Only 18% feel that it's not. You can see that India and Indonesia, again, pretty optimistic in the way that they are looking at their economic well-being. Even the US coming in okay. Percentages that are more higher or feeling the same, not that much of the sample, really looking at it decreasing. You have a few countries that are looking a little bit more pessimistic. Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, where you can see that the percentages of people who are also feeling like the economic well-being is going to decrease given the background of the epidemic. So this just gives you a broad way. Now we have data for every country, but I'm not going to be able to present it today. So I'm going to just focus on China and the US, which I think is quite interesting also for people who are here today. So let's look at how has COVID impacted the China and the US consumer. Again, just looking into things like economic well-being, which you can see in China and the US, that of course, affluent Chinese are a bit more optimistic about their disposable income than our US sample. Even though this US sample, only 20% of them feel like their disposable income is actually going to go down. But there is a decent number that think that their disposable income will either increase or remain the same. But obviously China is looking a little bit more optimistic. And as you would have all heard that, in the first quarter, they were down minus 6.8% in their GDP. The second quarter, they're up 3.2%. We know that the economy is coming back. A lot of our clients are back to 2019 numbers. They're lucky enough to be doing that kind of business. So obviously it's looking a bit more optimistic. Women tend to be a little less optimistic in the US. Now, the reason why the analysts have picked it up is because there is a bit of a difference in the gender. in the way they are feeling about the crisis, in the way that they're feeling about their disposable income. In China, there are similar scores between men and women. You know, in the US, the women seem to be a little bit more worried. We'll see that it's also translating into not spending that much on, you know, experiences and travel at the moment. So they're just being cautious, and that's why we've called them out. If you look at generations, and again, you know, we hear so much, and my last presentation actually for the Global Wellness Summit was all about Gen Z and millennials, because, you know, this is a group that everybody is looking at, and we've got to be, you know, looking and focusing on them, especially in countries like China and India, where you're talking about 350 to 400 million millennials that are coming out of those countries, you know, optimistic, big numbers. And you can see here as well that the Generation Z and millennials across both countries actually are looking more positive about their disposable income. While, you know, the older folks are looking a bit more pessimistic in that sense. Again, not the numbers are not so different, but there is a change to call out. And we'll see how this is translating into spends across different markets, across different age groups. So as a result of a more optimistic mood, the affluent Chinese are definitely expected to continue to increase their luxury consumption and experiences. And I think the key thing is that they're consuming at home. So, you know, the fact that they're not traveling, the fact that they're restricted from travel, is that a lot of this consumption is happening at home. And therefore, whether it's hotels, whether it's luxury goods, whether it's experiences, a lot of that consumption is happening. And you know, we're seeing that increasing. I was on a call with a client who said, and I was amazed, it's a pretty premium jewelry brand that they're doing 3 times the business that they were doing last year at this time. So there are certain categories, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, how the Chinese and even affluent consumers across the Asia Pacific are actually investing in brands which are more classic, maybe even more expensive, in things like watches and jewelry, more than just handbags. So, you know, there is that shift in the way that they're consuming. Now, there's a large number of American affluent women in particular who expect their consumption of luxury products and experiences to decrease in the coming year. And we've also seen that in intention to travel for the Americans, where they've talked about both domestic and overseas travel, that they're going to cut down a bit. And I mean, it's bound to happen because the epidemic is just, you know, still going, and there are so many restrictions. And we'll see later on that people are worried about, you know, the fact that they can get infected with the virus. Let's look at a different element, you know, besides spending and besides consumption. We're always looking at philanthropy, we're looking at sustainability, you know, we're looking at how people are feeling about the environment, about society. One thing we've seen is that within charity and donations, we see that the affluent Chinese, 44%, in this case, in this sample, more than the affluent Americans, plan to increase their donations to charitable causes at this point of time. So, you know, we do know that people like Jack Ma and other people who are idolized and looked up to are definitely joining the whole force around donations, around philanthropy. And I think this is, you know, going down into deeper. And you can see that the Gen Z and millennials across both countries indicate the highest propensity to increase donations in charitable causes. We'll talk a little bit about what kind of donations these are. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, what kind of causes they would like brands to support, because I think that's very important. So one thing that is very clear, that despite an upbeat mood among personal prospects, there's a real concern about the economy. And this is high across China and the US. So, you know, there are people who are either very concerned or somewhat concerned, both across the US and China. And even the worsening of diplomatic and economic ties between China and the US is looming large in both countries. You know, particularly in China, where 93% of our sample are concerned about it. Now, given what's going on with TikTok, with WeChat, you know, with some of the apps, with, you know, the deteriorating trade tensions, obviously it's not surprising. A lot of these people are affluent and high net worth. They invest all over the world and they are impacted by any of these changes. So you see a very small percentage, just 2% across both countries saying it doesn't apply to me, or, you know, 5% saying I'm not that concerned. So there is a big key concern about the economy, also about, you know, the relations and ties between the two countries. Now let's look beyond, you know, what we're talking about. And I think today, being a forum of people who are focused on, you know, health, on wellness, on life priorities, we've actually zoned into those sort of insights as we move along, because I thought that would be important for the group. You can see that some of the key concerns across both countries, my health is right on top of the Chinese sample. You know, it's not that people were not worried about health and wellness. It's just that it's got accelerated during this crisis. You know, things that have got amplified, my family's health and security, my children's future. There's also a topic around my ability to spend. You know, the Chinese feel like it is going to impact. You can see that the US sample, a lot of them were parents, reminding you that it was 45 years and above. So people did have kids. They're worried about their children's future, their family's health and security. 41% have actually talked about becoming infected with the COVID-19, because it's still a big worry and one of their key concerns, and it's looming large. While obviously in China, they started first, ended off earlier. So it's still not coming up as, you know, a health concern at this point of time domestically. Moving on to some of their life priorities, you know, living a healthy lifestyle ranks as the most important priority in the US. So, you know, having enough money to retire is bigger, and having a healthy life is more important than achieving financial success, you know, for the sample that we're talking to. Even in China, children's education, living a healthy lifestyle is more important at the moment and in focus, rather than financial success or even money to retire. Now you can see that the Gen Z and millennials in China are prioritizing, you know, living a healthy lifestyle, while in the US, we see higher percentages in the 40 plus group. So this is a bit different in terms of the numbers, with the millennials getting more conscious in China about their health and wellness. Now, what does, you know, living a healthy lifestyle really mean? What does it translate into? And, you know, has it changed during COVID as well? You can see that some of the things that they're doing in living a healthy lifestyle, you know, exercising more is big. I was just on a panel with JD.com, you know, and they mentioned that how the yoga mat was their biggest seller during COVID, you know, so people have been exercising at home. It's definitely a really big priority. You can see in China, people are talking about mental wellness, you know, eating more healthy food, pursuing a passion or hobby. You can see in the US, again, they're talking about reducing stress, improving sleep. I mean, you know, these are some of the priorities for people in different markets. And how has COVID-19 changed their lives? And this was, you know, upfront, a question right for them. And what are the most critical ways that the virus has changed their life? And obviously, as a company that is monitoring this data and insights, we've got to keep looking into this data as we go along to see what sustains. But you can see that I will be adopting a healthier lifestyle is pretty much on top, not only of these two countries, but a lot of the data that we're looking at. If you look at China, they're talking about protecting the environment, buying more from sustainable brands. Again, we've been tracking sustainability for a lot of our clients, whether they are wine and alcohol or the LVMH group. What does sustainability mean? How can brands support this? You can see that even in Asia now, there is a huge focus towards sustainable brands. People are ready to pay more for sustainable brands. So they're talking about even investing in sustainable companies. And we do a lot of work for banks where they're looking at social impact investing and, the new consumer who's interested. Now, another way that has changed their lives in China is I'll be traveling more domestically. And, the Chinese traveling more domestically obviously also affects the whole world in terms of a lot of businesses and a lot of focus that look at the Chinese traveler, for instance, whether it's travel retail. So that's going to impact a number of businesses. While in the US, they're talking about, again, traveling more domestically, but they did mention that I want to buy fewer luxury items, but ones that are classic and last for a longer time. So, there is this movement towards more classic brands. We've heard about when the revenge shopping has started, and as markets are bouncing back, we've seen some of the classic brands, whether it's Hermes or Chanel or Rolex, people have actually moved towards those brands even more than they were before the epidemic, because they just want to invest in some of these iconic brands that, maybe they can pass on. They're more classic. Now in the US, they also talk about socializing, more with friends, and I'll be doing more to protect the environment. So these are kind of the 5 top things that really influenced, has been directly influenced by the virus. Now, new hobbies that people have taken to, and a lot of these are not new. It's just that for the sample, this is something new they're doing. So, they're golfing, swimming, yoga, running, fitness, tourism, basketball, tennis, football, badminton. So much is around fitness, exercise, health. This is really core. If you look at the US, they're talking about cooking. We know that baking has been this huge kind of, all over the world. It's been a trend. I mean, people have been baking bread at home, and, they've been baking all kinds of things. So it's been big. If you look at the US, reading, gardening, walking, exercise, hiking, almost going back to the very simple things of life, because during this time, one has been more inwardly focused. One has not been traveling or socializing that much. A lot of people in lockdown. So really looking at things that are simple and they could do at home. And so these are some of kind of the new hobbies that they've taken up during this time. What causes are people concerned about? So what are they thinking about? What are the causes that brands or, people on the call, some of the things that even people can get aligned with, because this is what consumers are talking about. So in China, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities, communities, fair trade, ethical sourcing, donating medical supplies. In the US also, they're talking about education. There's comments about, climate change. There's a lot that is going on. And one thing that's happened during the epidemic is that people have had time to think about these things. People have had time to think about how brands are, supporting causes. People have had time to reset, to recharge, to think again about the world, which, wasn't the case earlier. A lot of us were just rushing around, jet setting around between our offices, not having the time to maybe think enough about the community and the world. And this we're definitely seeing in this data, but across other work that we're doing with brands, that, there is a heightened sense of social responsibility, of protecting brands that are sustainable, environment friendly. So these are all some of the themes. Sustainability, again, huge topic, and there can be all full research that we're doing with brands, so much of strategy around how they can get aligned. But really, we can see that across both markets, there is a strong support for sustainability. People are willing to pay more for a product, that is eco-friendly across both these countries. So there is this consciousness that is there across markets, and we've seen it in Indonesia, we've seen it in India, we've seen it in other markets which earlier were not that conscious about these themes. So I think that's important as well from the point of how we deal with our consumers, how we associate ourselves with things that are important to them. Now, some of the people who have been influential, or just, having, who have they really aligned themselves with? Who have they been influenced? Now, there's a very large number, and, there's a lot of work we do just around KOLs, key opinion influencers, we do all that kind of work. But these are just broadly some of the people who stood out or were heard or who got mentioned. There was a combination. I mean, doctors are the new heroes, it's celebrities are now at home, packed away, actors, performers, everybody is not to be seen. They're back to gardening and reading and cooking. But, the heroes have been the doctors. And there've been some people who've been recognized because of the work that they've done, positive contributions during the epidemic. It could be a blogger, it could be a singer, a songwriter. Of course, there is some pride as well in leadership in China on the way that they've handled the crisis. So there's a combination of people, but definitely there's been a change in how people view doctors, how people view people who are really, frontline and the healthcare workers. And this has also been seen in the data that we have. Let's look at the US again, very political dominated. So, we can see all the usual suspects there, some of who we might not want to see or, but they're all there. They're in the middle of the crisis being heard. Of course, again, medicine, health, people aligned with that have been heard. People are talking about being influenced with some of the leaders. And so therefore, these are the people who came up. But again, we've got lists, within different categories. How have people influenced maybe travel? How have people been recognized? But this is generally, the broad group of people who came up as people who had been influential during the crisis. Let's move a little bit to, how have people been spending? Because I think it's important to know which categories have done well and which have not. And it's important to see what those categories are. And also for us, since our brands, sit across different categories, we're watching that share of wallet. So we do know that while the US, there is still, retail has been suffering quite a lot. There are signs of recovery in China, and especially in the luxury end. So there have been queues. I'm sure all of you have heard that, a lot of luxury brands have even revised prices at this time. So, people like Chanel and Dior and LV actually upped their prices. And there were queues before people heard about this, because that was the kind of activity levels that these brands have seen. So it's important to kind of notice that. Now let's look at where people have continued to spend and some of the categories which have not seen that much spend. And I think it's important that things like tablets, smartphones, in-home electronics have just gone up across different markets. We've been spending time at home, gadgets have been very important. But besides that, you can see in China, skincare, makeup, we continue to do a lot of work around beauty, whether it's makeup or cosmetics, because it's been important and big, fashion, alcohol, jewelry, sports, gym, yoga. You can see in the US, alcohol is right on top. And some of, we do a lot of work with clients like Diageo and Grant and even Remy Martin, even Louis XIII is selling a lot. So there are brands that, have bounced back. But you can see in the categories that haven't done that well, spas have suffered. It's been a lockdown, physical, closeness, social distancing hasn't helped. So, we've seen that. Cars, not many people have been moving around. There has been, cars have been slightly more on the lower end, clubs, art, cruises. I mean, there's been a lot of negative, publicity around cruises, which hasn't helped. But you'll see that there's a huge pent up demand for travel. So it's coming, for brands that are in travel and hospitality. It's been a brutal time, but the only good news is that, there is pent up demand. A lot of people are looking forward to traveling, and a lot of domestic travel is actually begun in countries like, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, just people traveling, across their countries. So there is that, but definitely hasn't been on the top of spends as we would usually see travel and travel experiences being quite on top. Again, not a surprise, e-commerce, there's been a huge acceleration, countries that were savvy with e-commerce, where online shopping is very much embraced, whether it was India, China, whether it was Korea, markets like that, they did better during the COVID. In fact, Singapore suffered a lot because, online shopping isn't that sophisticated. So did Japan, for that matter. You can see that purchases made via e-commerce, have increased a lot, right? So there is this aspect of life which has changed. And, maybe for daily things and things that, you don't need to go and browse around and shop for, you can just shop for at home. I mean, they can send it home. You can see that men, for example, versus women in the US have also upped their thoughts on, ordering online. And then, of course, millennials across China, they are very well known for online shopping. And I mean, you would have heard the kind of business that people like Alibaba and JD have done. And the biggest sort of game changer is the fact that tier 4, tier 5 cities have all been served during the crisis because brands were online, and people could order no matter where they were. So it's been quite a game changer in that sense. And then preferring to buy luxury products online, is this something that people prefer when it's luxury? And now we see that the numbers are still very much higher for in-store. And this is across markets. People enjoy going to a store and enjoying the service. They're being able to kind of really feel that luxury experience. So, though they buy online, the choice is really to go into store. And do people shop when they travel? Of course. I mean, the crazy rich Asians, right? They're famous for going abroad and shopping, and people are missing them. I mean, we have lots of clients in Europe who are really missing, the Asian shopping this summer. So you can see that regularly buying luxury items when I travel is quite high in China and also quite high in the US. And of course, there are some people who say they don't buy luxury when they travel. But we know that travel retail is one of those sectors which has really been hit because people are not traveling, and the duty frees are suffering. And China recently has opened up the Hainan province as a duty free zone, so people can actually shop, in duty free in China now, which is what they resorted to because people are not traveling abroad. Now, brands that stood out during the crisis, right? We've talked about people, but consumers have been very conscious about brands that stood out and brands that they could connect, brands that were, extremely communicated well with them, were thoughtful, were considerate. And a lot of those brands that we heard about, people like Tesla and Louis Vuitton, they use their production lines to make PPE equipment. The Americans talked about Delta, they're maintaining their travel status. People talked about Ping An. They started offering coronavirus. I think the one thing that is, very critical is that the way that the brands have actually communicated during the crisis has been really important for these consumers. And when has been lifted, people have gone back. Is there a bit of an echo, or am I just getting it?
It comes and goes a little bit, but basically it's all fine.
Okay, great. No worries. Other brands that, people have talked about, Estee Lauder, giving donations, ensuring supplies, protection, safety, some local brands in China, jewelry brands. They've talked about Hilton hotels, waiving off cancellation fees. I think this was a time when the consumers were really absorbing and were very conscious about the way that brands were communicating with them. And a lot of brands did a great job. I mean, they were online on Instagram. Designers of very big brands were communicating with everybody. There was a real movement towards being very considerate. And the good news is that the consumers have remained loyal to brands. So when things have opened up, people have gone back to those brands, and they feel like they need to support them. So definitely how brands communicate at this time is going to be important throughout the year and maybe over the coming year. Now we're going to move on to travel, which is obviously, a big theme, and a lot of people on this call and otherwise are impacted by what's going on in travel. Now, there are people who are waiting for the rebound. I mean, there's so much of bad news in terms of airlines. A lot of our clients across hospitality and airlines have suffered. But one thing is there, that, a rebound is going to come as things get lifted. And there are people, especially if you look at these two countries, China, where 12% of our sample are looking to increase their spend on leisure travel, and 34% somewhat looking to increase. And you see the US coming a little lower, but they are looking to travel. And you can see that, of course, the millennials, again, the young population, are much more able to and have a propensity to travel, and there is this pent up demand. People are looking to travel and get a break. And let's look at some of the places that they want to travel to. So now domestic trips are obviously going to be the ones to benefit at this time, because, international trips are going to be difficult. Overseas trips are difficult. Quarantines are in place everywhere. So the first thing that is really going to come back and is coming back, I mean, we've heard of lots of good news for hotels, for airlines within Japan. Domestic travel has been big in Japan. Of course, now the cases have been going up, so there's going to be, a bit of an issue there. But domestic travel in Korea has been going up, has been going up in Indonesia, and also in China. There is, domestic travel that is seeing an upside. And even in the US, though the numbers are lesser, there is this demand to travel domestically. Some of the places where they want to go off to, and this is really interesting because it's so much impacted by the epidemic. So we see for the Chinese, they feel more comfortable being around Asia, where, they feel like the cases are less, it's more controlled, it's close to home. So places where they would like to go to in the coming year, they talk about Japan, they talk about Hong Kong, they talk about Korea, Singapore, they also talk about France. So, the next few numbers. Now, this has drastically changed from January when we spoke to them, when even the US was on the top 3 of that list. So, there was a lot of Chinese who were planning to travel to the US at the start of the year. It was still on that list. And, there were other places on their list. They were traveling to Africa. They were traveling, to the Maldives. So all those places have definitely, there's been a shift. And if you look at the US, of course, they're looking to travel to Europe. They want to go to parts of Europe that are very popular. They'd like to go to Canada. They'd like to definitely visit these places once they open up. So Italy, UK, France, they're all on top of that list. And again, Europe is missing, on one hand, the Asian travelers, but also the American travelers in the summer, So this is, demand is going to go up for these places once things open. Now, reasons for avoiding international travel. And I mean, all of these are really very much to do with the epidemic. They're concerned about getting infected. They're concerned about travel restrictions and delays. And then they're also conscious that they shouldn't travel, because they're going to be spreading COVID-19. And I think with what we've been seeing in the world, and a lot of the recent cases in New Zealand, in Europe, all really being kind of going into a different role with the travel that's happening. So people are conscious about that. But I mean, travel is directly getting impacted and getting restricted, while what that is leading to is some shift of funds towards other things. So, I can't travel this summer. Maybe I can buy a Rolex watch. I'm not traveling. So maybe I can save up for something else that I'm doing. I'm not traveling. So can I have a fine dining meal, at home? So there are definitely some of the budgets that were going to be spent on travel are moving into different things, whether those are around health or wellness or, around luxury experiences or domestic shopping that they might be doing. And this is quite clear from a lot of other data that we're seeing. Now, we wanted to also look at, has the reason for traveling changed, because we speak to them in January, we speak to them last year, and is there a change in why people want to travel for leisure? And, we know that business travel is really going to be impacted. So many of us are doing business on Zoom, we're not going to travel. People have realized that, you can do business without traveling that much, but leisure is still going to continue. And we can see some of the reasons on why they want to travel, to enjoy nature, to relax, to unwind, to strengthen relationships, to meet family. I think that's kind of the most critical part of, traveling, to meet family. So that's still going to remain a very compelling reason to learn about culture, to conquer new territories, visit a new place, pamper myself. So there are lots of reasons why people are looking to travel. And we did see that wellness travel to improve my health, 20% of our sample in China, 11% in the US, talked about traveling specifically for health retreats or, improving their health. But we know that there are lots of reasons for leisure travel, and it's definitely going to pick up when it's allowed, while we look at business travel, which will be more restricted. Now, some of the hotel brands that, people connected with, again, we wanted to see, was there a difference? You saw that, brands like Hilton, for example, that, their loyalty points, they were connected with their customers, so some of the big brands have remained popular, whether it's the Marriott or the Shangri-La, which the Chinese love, or whether it's, the Four Seasons and the Waldorf Astoria. So obviously our sample is well-traveled and they remained connected with some of the brands that they like and to visit. So, the brands were not that different. So in summary, and I'm conscious that we've got about 10 minutes left. So, I want to just go over this and leave a few, but I think it's important to kind of bring it together and summarize in what's happening in the world's two major economies, which are always in the news. And all of us have been tracking that. And it's good to get some real data from our consumers, because sometimes we're just imagining and having a hypothesis that people are thinking that way. So our group, which is a bit more affluent and high net worth, definitely their overall economic well-being, the thoughts that they have about their disposable income are not that pessimistic. They are looking at either, maintaining what they have, in some cases also increasing their income. But of course, the crisis has accentuated sometimes the gender gap. We saw that in the US, some of the women particularly talked about spending less, or talked about the fact that their income may not be that high. We saw that in both countries, the younger generation, are looking more optimistic, want to travel, want to spend. Obviously, the affluent Chinese are not only expected to resume, we know that they have resumed a lot of their shopping around luxury and, luxury experiences. And therefore, those budgets are definitely there. While concerns about the COVID are definitely on top of mind and people are really focused on their health, but there is also a worry about the future of their children. So, they're talking about that. What's life going to be in the future? Now, the silver lining is that the current situation is actually driving a lot of changes in terms of a healthier lifestyle, an appreciation of the environment, of society, a willingness to contribute more actively, consciousness about the world around you. So I think there's definitely been, a change in lifestyle and the way we think after the epidemic, but we have to wait and see if that continues, or do people completely get back to normal, and get back to the pre-COVID days. And so that's the data, and obviously different things that brands can look at around here. And I'm sure a lot of you are already doing things around customer loyalty. We're doing a lot on the consumer journey, which has changed so much. How do you innovate? How do you develop local products? A theme I couldn't talk about today, but all economies are seeing a steep rise in their local brands. I mean, every country is supporting local brands and is wanting that movement to increase. And then we'll just end with the last slide, which is, basically, if you need help in any categories, data and insight, you can come to us anytime. And with that, Nancy, I will pass it back to you. And I hope that was insightful.
Amrita, that was fantastic. And if you will also get a copy of the chat, and you'll see how much people appreciate the depth of information and also the expert presentation that you did. So thank you, and thank you to Luca, your colleague, who is also on the call, who ran that PowerPoint, but who's behind the scenes doing all this work as well. Absolutely
fantastic. A lot of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So I will just say, because it's 10:23 and we do end on time, obviously we can't get to a ton of questions. There have been a lot of questions about other countries. Do you do this for countries outside of Asia? What about India, which is another enormous market? And I know there just hasn't been time to do this. So come to the summit, and everybody come to the summit, and Amrita can expand her presentation and maybe include a lot more. There was certainly good news for wellness, tourism, and travel. People looking for nature, improving their health, all bode well for the industry. I wonder if, just in summary, you might give us your thoughts on what the lasting impact of this epidemic has been, this pandemic, on this affluent customer base.
So I think, we saw from the data that definitely there's been a shift in the way people are thinking about their lives and broader concerns, so much more than where you're traveling off to and, what you're spending on and which college your son and daughter are going to go to. They're much more broader concerns, so they're talking about the environment, they're talking about their health and lifestyle, and they're also had time to kind of rethink and reset their priorities, which is why you can see that some of the priorities we talked about were so basic. And I think even the hobbies that they've taken up are so very simple and basic. So I'd say back to basics in that sense. But, again, we have to wait and see how that evolves as we go along.
It's so interesting that not surprising, the younger generations are driving, so much of this. And I don't know whether or not in any of this research, people are concerned at all about diversity and inclusion in terms of the brands and what they represent. Is that important? That's very important in this country. Is it important throughout the world? Are you finding that that has come up as well?
I think it does, and I was just reading that Louis Vuitton just did a show in China, just a couple of weeks ago, I think a men's show. And the kind of diversity that they talked about and the type of models and, the kind of colors. And of course, Ablo himself, the designer, has really set a whole different tone to, design and inclusion and diversity. So definitely it's a big topic, and it's almost like it's a given. So it's like people expect that now, so they expect diversity, they expect inclusion, even in Asia. I mean, it's a given.
Okay, that's very good news. As you look at this through the lens that you're looking through. I just want to mention something, because a lot of people have asked about the presentation. This, as I mentioned, this is recorded, and so all of the slides that Amrita shared are part of that recording that will be on our website. We are not going to send along any PowerPoint presentation. I do want to mention that Amrita and Luca, out of the goodness of our relationship with them and their desire to really share this very, very important information, are doing this for us. Their clients pay a lot of money for this information, most of whom have not seen it yet, unless they joined our call. So, we're not able to share that, but I would say that you should all get in touch with them, and we will send all that information if you and your companies are interested in having deep dives into this information. Amrita, I'm going to ask you what I ask every one of our masterclass guests, and that is, what personally keeps you up at night? What worries you about the world? You operate in a really interesting sphere, and what makes you feel optimistic about the world?
So I have to say I'm very positive and optimistic in general. So
I love you.
So I think I'm optimistic about the way that everybody is trying to do their bit, around the epidemic, in small or big ways. I have teenagers who I thought would never be conscious about this, but even they are so conscious. They don't want to spread it. They don't want to go to a home where there are elderly people. They want to meet in open spaces. So I think what really gives me hope is definitely the fact that I think everybody's trying in their own way to, cope with it and make it a better world. I think what keeps me up at night is the fact that the vaccine is not coming as quickly as it should. So I think I'm hoping for that, so that I can go see my mother, who I hope joined this call. She's never joined an event of mine. And I said that you should be on this, because she's an enthusiastic yoga and, spiritual enthusiast. So I don't know.
Is your mother on the call? If she's on the call, let's have her unmute for a minute and say hello.
I don't know if she is, and I don't know how savvy she is with technology. So I'll find out, Nancy, but I think she would.
Well, I hope if your mother is on this call, she's as proud as we are to know you and to have this information and to have you in our network. Susie, would you like to say something before we finish?
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Amrita. That was fantastic. And there was somebody in the chat that said something that I've been thinking since I heard you in Singapore. What an articulate presenter. You're really very good at presenting this. We can hear you, we can understand you. So your mother would be proud of that too, I'm sure. But it makes a difference, because people from all over the world are on this call. So when you hear someone that is articulating well, it really is a pleasure. So thank you. And at this point, we ask Beatrice to unmute everyone so that we can give you a round of applause and say thank you personally. So thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amrita.
Yes.
Rita and Luca, thank you.
Thank you,
Susie.
Thank
you, Nancy.
Nancy.
Thank you,
God bless you, Amrita.
All's well.
There's Luca.
Good job.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Love it. Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Really
you.
valuable.
Rita, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you,
Thank you.
Beatrice.
Thank you.
Much thanks.
Amrita, well done.
Well done indeed.
Fantastic. Now you can go to sleep.
I know. I won't be able to sleep for a while, but I'm sure.
You're absolutely terrific.
Yeah, very valuable information.
It's always
Wonderful
such
information.
a warm session.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
People were saying in the chat that this is kind of optimistic, that it's it's encouraging, and I think we've all needed that. So I think that has been fantastic, really, really valuable.
Great. And I hope to see